Money Talks with Cathy Yang, your intel on the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, the ICC bears its charges against former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. We speak with the Global Commission on Drug Policy in Sydney. Net foreign buying lifts Philippine stocks while the Philippine peso remains relatively strong. We speak with Sumitomo Mitsui Banking in Singapore. And the U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to hold interest rates steady. The decision is expected to be released on Wednesday, U.S. time. The Philippine National Police says it is ready to assist Interpol in arresting individuals linked to the drug war, should warrants be issued. PNP spokesperson Police Brigadier General Jean Fajardo said they now have a template for apprehending other potential suspects, but have yet to receive any information about a subsequent warrant from Interpol or the International Criminal Court. Meanwhile, rallies in support of former President Rodrigo Duterte continued over the weekend. Duterte supporters gathered at Liwasang Bonifacio in Manila for a prayer rally where Senator Bato de la Rosa criticized President Bongbong Marcos for allowing Duterte's arrests.
Palaging sinasabi ni President Marcos, hindi namin ni-recognize ang ICC kasi hindi natin membro. Hindi kami nagko-cooperate sa ICC. Commitment sa Interpol. Interpol! Presidente ka ng Pilipinas! Magpa-pressure ka sa Interpol?
In a press conference with former Senator Laila de Lima, former Vice President Leni Robredo says Duterte's arrest is a first step towards accountability and justice.
Yun lang. Yung lahat lang na sinasabi ngayon, ano to first step towards accountability, justice, na pinagdaanan na ni Sen. Laila. Kaya, all this talk about everything that's happening, about your process, about how unfair everything is, lagi kong nababalik dun sa sitwasyon.
Meanwhile, political group Bayan Muna urged President Bongbong Marcos to rejoin the ICC. Bayan Muna chairman Nery Colmenares says the move would show the government's genuine commitment to upholding human rights and ending the culture of impunity. Duterte, who withdrew the Philippines from the ICC in 2019, made his first appearance at the ICC via video link. His confirmation of charges hearing is set for September 2025. The Global Commission on Drug Policy urges all governments to reflect on the lessons from the Philippines following Duterte's arrest. The Geneva-based GCDP called for accountability for the extrajudicial killings, promoting humane, effective responses through international dialogue and evidence-based advocacy. The GCDP is composed of world leaders and intellectuals advocating for a more humane and effective approach to drug policy. With us now for more, live from Sydney, is the former Premier of Western Australia and currently GCDP Commissioner, Jeff Gallup. So good to see you, Jeff, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cathy. It's good to be with you.
So what does the Commission want the world leaders in the world to learn about the war on drugs?
Well, I guess there are two things. I mean, the first is, of course, that as a result of the creation of the ICC, the things that happen within a particular nation may very well be investigated by a body like the ICC with a view to following up as that's exactly what's happened here. The other very, very important lesson is, I think, that there ought to be some limits placed upon what executive governments can do in relation to people who use and possess drugs for their own personal consumption. I think that's a very, very important issue, and obviously that's one that the ICC is focused on.
I've come to know of the limits of GCDP back in 2016, having had the privilege of speaking with former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark in 2019 and Virgin Group founder Sir Richard Branson in 2016. Both of them commissioners too, like herself at the GCDP. I know that Helen spoke of decriminalizing drug use. And also Sir Richard Branson, he did speak about decriminalizing just as well, choosing life over death and rehabilitation. What is the way forward then for the Philippines, you think, in the context of, first, the Philippines being an emerging market and in a developing nation at that?
Well, I think it's very important that all of us reflect upon the way in which our particular societies work and the way they are governed. And clearly there are people that have taken up the use of drugs for their own personal reasons or religious reasons or cultural reasons. But there are also some people who take up drugs and find that they're in difficulty. They may be addicted, they may have substance abuse, and we need to help those people. And the problem is with the system that was created back in the 1960s, a simplistic notion that if we really put tough criminal law in place, people will stop using and slowly but surely will phase out the use of drugs in society. It hasn't worked. The war on drugs just hasn't worked. And as a result of that, the system we have creates more problems than it says it can solve. You know, the temptation by governments to go that extra step in trying to cut down on the use of drugs by breaking the compact people have with their governments that they will act in a civilised and humane way. So the whole point of the Global Commission was say, let's bring proper analysis to this issue based upon scientific knowledge, based upon evidence that we have, so that we can deal with this issue, which is an issue in our society, drug use and abuse, and of course the problem of addiction that can occur and really savage the lives of people. And then of course there's the very, very all too often problem of drug overdose leading to death. So I think we need to shift the whole balance to the human rights and dignity of people, plus their health as the focus. And in the Portuguese case, they spoke about going from criminalisation of people through to the humane patient type approach rather than a criminal type approach for people.
Now, shifting that balance, as you mentioned, and taking a humane-based approach, where then do we start with the Philippines? Because those championing safe spaces will tell you that they're all for humane, evidence-based approach, but they'll lament over access to evidence-based drug rehabilitation. That the poor do not have access, and oftentimes, if not always, the poor and the most vulnerable are the ones who are easiest to fall.
Just a first point there, the Global Commission has taken up the question of pain relief medication that ought to be available to people. And this is one of the great inequalities of our modern society and modern global economy. So that has been a real issue there, to make sure that there's equality in the system when it comes to the provision of all life-saving medicines, absolutely pain-killing medicines that are necessary for our society.
So what is the Commission intending to do to bring this equality and ensure that there will be evidence-based rehabilitation, even for developing nations and emerging markets like the Philippines?
Well, the Global Commission has a research function, of course, and also an advocacy function. It must bring to the table all of the research we have about this issue and why it is that one particular approach might work better than another one. So when it comes to the Philippines, I think it needs to have an overview of all of the issues that have been raised in the research, and then secondly, look at the specific problems that exist that have led to change in other countries. Portugal had a major heroin problem in the 1990s, and they sat down and said, well, what are we going to do about this? And they came up with their reform package of decriminalisation for all drugs. In Switzerland, back in the 1980s, that one of the major parks in Zurich had open air drug use and injecting going on. There was a law and order issue, and all of the community members plus the police plus the government got together and said, we need a new approach to this issue rather than the war on drugs approach. You go to that park now, and of course it's a wonderful place to be. So I think use the evidence, but make sure it's relevant to the needs of your particular country. And you know, there are a lot of options in this area. The Global Commission wants all of those options in an ideal world to be put into place. Treatment, as you've just indicated, is very important. You can't have a decriminalisation strategy that will necessarily be sustainable through time if it doesn't. It's sustainable through time in the system if it doesn't take into account treatment services as well as law.
To get the Commission to bring forth that knowledge and research, who will you be speaking with here in the Philippines to ensure that this gets across and gets implemented real fast?
I think it's important. There's the users, the people who take up the cause of their own fellow men and women and that are joined in and have an advocacy issue in the system. They're very important. It's very important to get the experts so that, I mean, this is not an easy area. This is a complex area, and we do need proper. It's easy to get on the bandwagon and wave the flag, but unless you have a sustainable approach with evidence, a way of implementing it, as well as advocating for it, you're not going to win the support, as much support. The other thing is, in some jurisdictions, we've seen the specialist attempts at consultation. In Ireland, they had a citizens' assembly, and the assembly looked at this very difficult issue of drugs and made certain recommendations to the government. So I think the people have to be in on it. The people have to. It's no good the governments of the world doing this from a top-down approach. They need to have the people on side so that what they do, if it's effective, the particular strategy they adopt, that it's sustainable into the future. And that's something that I'm particularly interested in. It's one thing to have an idea, it's another to have it, to put it practical implementation.
That's a call to action to the civil society here in the Philippines, which I thank you so much for continuing that conversation, Jeff. Commissioner Jeff Gallup of the Commission on Global Policy on Drugs, the former Premier of Western Australia, joining us live from Sydney. And let's take stock. Let's take stock of how Philippine markets have done so far in the past week. Markets so far unfazed by developments following Duterte's arrest. Analysts we've interviewed on this program say it's had minimal impact on the markets, though many still on a wait-and-see attitude of what kind of domestic response evolves ahead of the midterm elections. But beyond that, what continued to roil the markets here was the risk-off sentiment on Wall Street because of Trump's trade war. This is the dollar now, as you're seeing on the screen, hovering now at 4-month lows versus the major global currencies since Trump came to office. So that's meant relative strength to the Philippine peso. The peso is currently at 57.25, as you can see on that chart. Since the record high of 59 last seen on December 19th, the one encircled in the red dot there, the peso has since strengthened to nearly 3%. That's the strongest it's ever been in more than 5 months. And when you look at the peso and how it's performing relative to its Asian and ASEAN peers, here's how it looks like. We're right in the middle of the pack, 1% stronger to the dollar, behind the Korean won, the Thai baht, Singapore dollar, and the Japanese yen. The next important support over the next 6 months, says RCBC's Mike Ricafort, is 57.20. Get a quick check on how the peso is doing. In the first 40 minutes of trading, the peso is stronger at 57.20 to the dollar. Our local currency closed on Friday at 57.25 against the dollar. Let's take a look at the PSE index and see how stocks are doing. At the open, it is up 0.3% at 6,313. So the upward move is continuing in the first 15 minutes of trading. It's worth noting that net foreign buying supported recent gains in Philippine stocks. Net foreign buying ended higher for the week at $32.5 million US dollars. That's higher than the previous week, 6.9 million. So that's 5 times more. Net foreign buying helped lift the Philippine Stock Exchange Index, rise among the 1.5-month highs, and hover above the 6,200 psychological mark. We're now trending at 6,300 and above. Well, with us now for more, live from Singapore, is Jeff Nang, the head of Asia Macro Strategy at Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation. So good to see you, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So
Cathy.
what do you make of the resilience of the PSEI and the peso's relative resilience? What's the key catalyst or catalysts you're seeing down the line?
I think over the past year, markets are now concerned that the US may not do as well as anticipated. So if the US economy is not the market to invest in, I think investors globally are looking into many other markets, including the Philippines. And I think the Philippines does have some attractive proposition this year with a lot of downside risk to merchandise trade. The services-oriented Philippines economy does have some potential to benefit, as it may be less impacted directly by tariffs. And I think as investors diversify away from US, I think there's plenty of pockets in Asia. Asia continues to be the growth market, and I think that includes the Philippines as well, with a positive demographic story, positive domestic consumption story. I think that is helping to benefit markets at this stage.
It's interesting you did make a mention of the political risk premium there. Duterte's arrest and the risk premium that it's stoking. Are you seeing any of that reflected in the risk appetites in the Philippine markets?
I think for now, it looks like markets are more focusing on Trump's policies. So I think this theme of Trump, trade and tariff have been the main global theme since the start of the year. Of course, in various economies, it could be quite competitive as well. Domestic policies does matter. For example, there have been some concerns about the president in Indonesia, the policies, whether they are likely to be favorable going forward. So that may have dampened a bit of the rupiah this year. But for peso, I think there's not been that much domestic concern. And I think that's also helping to boost the overall performance for the peso as well as for the stock market going forward. I think, of course, going forward, markets will also be watching out for the outcome of the midterm election, whether they may have an impact on policy making in the coming years to come.
What's going to happen later this week on March 20th, Asia time? Do you think they'll make a rate cut, the Federal Open Market Committee, and if so, by how much?
Yeah, I think for now, the Fed is likely to stay in a wait-and-see mode. We don't expect that the Fed will change policy rates. In fact, I mean, there's also some chance that the Fed may not choose to cut policy rates at all. That's what some of us in SMBC are watching out for. I think if the global market deteriorate and the conditions, economic conditions, employment conditions in the US deteriorate, there could be some case for rate cuts in the US. But for now, I think the uncertainty from Trump's policies on growth and on inflation in the US and in other parts of the world, I think these are highly complex at this stage, and I think markets may be mispricing the risk somewhat. So I don't think that the Fed may make any drastic adjustments to its current outlook and stay in a wait-and-watch mode for now as more data is being awaited.
10 seconds, your peso dollar forecast?
Yeah, I think maybe by end of the year, if there's some continued dollar weakness, there could be some chance for the peso to move lower, which means that it could break the level of 57 or even below. For now, I think if there's in the near term some concerns about inflation coming back into the US and perhaps the Fed taking a more neutral or maybe even turning hawkish, then there could be some pockets of dollar strength. Certainly throughout the year, we expect heightened volatility. So that may mean some periods of time, some months where the dollar could strengthen, and that should focus the attention back towards the 58 to 59 level once again. But for now, I think we still see that if the US economy starts to weaken a bit more, whereas the Philippine economy starts to recover more, I think that could help with some performance in the peso against the dollar, heading towards 57 or even below.
Got that, 57 and or below. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the time and the assessment there. Jeff Nang of Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corp live from Singapore. Up next, the first photo of Pope Francis as he continues to recover in a hospital. This and more world news coming up here on Money Talks on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. The Philippines' outstanding external debt grew by nearly 10% by the end of 2024. Preliminary data from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas show the country's external debt increased by 9.8% to over $137 billion. The Bangko Sentral says the increase was primarily due to the net availments totaling to over $9.6 billion to meet the liquidity needs of both the public and private sectors. The Philippine services trade declined in 2024 as export growth lagged behind imports. Preliminary data from the Bangko Sentral show the country's trade in services fell by nearly 20% to over $14 billion. The decline stemmed from service exports, rising by only 7.5% year-on-year, while imports rose by 24%. Other business services made up the largest share with a balance of over $15 billion. This category includes research and development, professional and management consulting, as well as technical, trade-related, and other business services. The U.S. Federal Reserve is set to announce a rate decision at the end of Wednesday's meeting. Previous comments from the Fed and market expectations both indicate rates will keep steady at 4.25% to 4.5%. U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policies and declines in equity markets likely to factor in when the board meets on Tuesday and Wednesday. Markets are now anticipating 325 basis point reductions this year after only expecting 2 or even 1. As we start a brand new week, let's take a look at how the U.S. markets performed during Friday's session. All the indexes climbed after fears of a government shutdown vanished. The Dow up by over 1.5%, S&P 500, which recently fell into correction, gained by over 2%, and the Nasdaq gained by over 2.5%. Let's take a look at U.S. futures and see how they're trending ahead of the market open this week. The Dow is down by 0.4%, S&P declining by about 0.5%, and the Nasdaq sank 0.6%. U.S. markets are headed for a big week starting Monday with the release of U.S. retail sales to be followed by the Fed's rate decision on Wednesday. Let's have a look at the Asian markets, how they're opening today on Monday. They look higher as investors are monitoring the Chinese equity markets. The Australian ASX 200 index is up 0.6%, South Korea's index climbing by about 1.25%, and Japan's Nikkei 225 rises by 1%. We keep an eye on the numerous Chinese figures out today, including industrial production, urban investment, and urban unemployment rate. Let's get a quick check again at the Philippine market, see how that's doing. PSEI has opened higher, 0.3% still at 6,313. It is trading higher as of the moment by about 0.4%. As for the peso, it's opened stronger at 57.20 to the dollar. Here are the stories making headlines around the world. In South Korea, protesters gathered in huge numbers on Saturday to support or oppose impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. The Constitutional Court expected to decide whether his short-lived declaration of martial law disqualifies him from office. In Seoul, anti-Yoon protesters call for his immediate removal, while supporters crammed a few blocks away to demand for his return. In a Gallup Korea poll published on Friday, 58% supported Yoon's impeachment, while 37% opposed it. In North Macedonia, the Prime Minister says the nightclub that went on fire on Sunday and eventually killed 59 people is not a legitimate business. Investigation shows permit for the Pulse nightclub had been issued illegally by officials from the Economy Ministry. Authorities arrested 20 people in connection with the fire, including local officials and the nightclub's manager. Nearly 150 were injured, brought to Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece to undergo hospital treatment. And in the Vatican, a new photo of Pope Francis has been released since he first began hospital treatment last month. The 88-year-old pontiff pictured from behind as he is seated in a hospital chapel, where he celebrated Mass on Sunday together with other priests. Francis has been battling double pneumonia, and yet he has no plans to step down, his friends and biographers say. The Pope recently approved a new 3-year process to consider reforms for the global Catholic Church. Over the weekend, he celebrated his 12 years in the papacy. And before we go, just take a look at this longest conveyor belt in the U.S. Atlas Energy Solutions, a Texas-based oil field company, built this to transport millions of tons of sand. It's cheaper and safer than trucks, but just how fast is it? Well, it crawls 10 miles or 16 kilometers per hour, but it can bypass and trudge alongside traffic. Just how long is this conveyor belt? It's 42 miles or 67 kilometers and snakes across the oil fields of the southwest U.S. It has a capacity of 13 tons or almost 11.8 metric tons and costs $400 million US. Maybe we should have one along EDSA and maybe create more traffic. That is it for Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. here on One News. We're also streamed live on YouTube and on our Facebook channels. Have a great day ahead.